And I'm going to ask Carolyn Ellis to begin this session with the eulogy as a spiritual autoethnography. Carolyn.
Okay, and I've retitled it a little, Autoethnographic Eulogies Responding to Diverse Audiences. And it comes from a much longer paper called The Eulogy as Spiritual Autoethnography. In 2022-23, I presented 3 eulogies in different regions and religious venues. The first in a small evangelical Lutheran church in Luray, Virginia. The second in a small mission church near Biloxi, Mississippi, that practiced hands-on divine faith healing and speaking in tongues. And the third in a Reformed Jewish synagogue in St. Petersburg, Florida. Since I'm not a religious person in a traditional sense, and certainly not evangelical, and I do not hold membership in organized religious groups, I faced the challenge of figuring out how to connect with my audiences in these contexts. I hope to honor the deceased with my words, resonate with and respect community norms, and feel authentic in terms of my own sensibilities and beliefs. I hope that congregants might, for this short time, no matter our religious, political, and cultural differences, feel that we were in this moment together as a community of grievers seeking to cope with and find meaning in our loss. The eulogies themselves are quite long, so what I want to do in my short time here is speak briefly about how I communicate it to the audience. First, I speak in my hometown, a small conservative Virginia mountain community, and this is at my brother's service. I am neither politically conservative nor dedicated to a church-going Christian faith, as are almost all the people attending. My politics have a left-leaning liberal base, and my spirituality tends toward an emphasis on nature, service, love, and kindness. I want my family to be proud of me, and I want my words to be meaningful. Yet, do I really know who these people are now, more than 50 years since I have lived here? Do I know them solely from interacting with my family? Or do I simply stereotype them as Trump followers or MAGAs, Make America Great Again people, assuming that what I see on TV is who they are too? In this eulogy for my brother, who has advanced dementia and lymphoma, I tell a story about the last time I was with him and how we sang Amazing Grace and Happy Birthday together for his wife's birthday. I feel the audience will connect with this loving family scene, no matter their persuasion. I end by reciting from Amazing Grace, a religious song I love and that was sung at the service. And I say the phrase at the end, and grace will lead me home. I conclude, my brother was ready then to go home, as he said over and over that day and during his last few weeks of life. And I will never forget the grace of being home with family, surrounded by love, and that moment, that precious moment of harmonizing with art and his voice, the gift of touching each other's earthly souls one last time. A year later, I am speaking at my sister's funeral in Mississippi in a church where the sermons are often oriented toward being born again, the second coming of Christ, and preparing for the rapture. They view Donald Trump as the one who can save America and successfully transition us to the end times. As I begin to speak, I walk over to the photo of my sister. Look at the spiritual portrayal, I direct. Isn't she beautiful, just like an angel? They respond with a collective yes and amen, and I feel we are connecting already. As I walk back to the pulpit, I say, I have a prepared text. I'm a retired professor, and that's what we do, we prepare, so that they will know that my talk will be different from the free-flowing sin and redemption preaching they are used to. They laugh. I tell them my relationship with my sister, its ups and downs, though mainly the ups, emphasizing how we were best friends when she died. I tell of visiting her in Mississippi, where she was hallucinating wildly from the cancer meds, including one continuous fantasy about rising from a casket in a beautiful gown and singing at Donald Trump's wedding, which made us all chuckle, though perhaps for different reasons. I tell about how one of Judy's greatest joys was becoming part of the church. There, I say, she found love, care, joy, acceptance, and spiritual companionship. And as she testified, she said, I came to church to learn how to die. Instead, I learned how to live. And live she did. She loved and trusted in the Lord to show her the way. We are indebted to her friends in this church for their love and support of Judy. Thank you. I pause and glance around the church, making eye contact with the minister and special friends of my sister. Then I move to what I have learned from my sister with examples such as the beauty of love, the importance of family and taking care of each other, joy, patience, kindness, forgiveness, the meaning making of telling stories and sharing memories, the importance of faith and community. I say, I have learned from Judy the courage to do what you have to do and the wisdom to know what is best to do. Judy took on cancer with a vengeance, and then when she decided it was time to let go of treatment, she faced dying with faith that she was in God's hands. I say, I have learned about accepting illness and being at peace. Judy helped us all get through her illness every step of the way. At the very end, my sister hesitated to leave this world in the love of her family, but her belief that she was going to be with God and would be welcomed by loved ones who had gone before her guided her through the transition. I think now that it may represent a fine line, but these were statements that I could make about my sister without taking them on as my own, without sacrificing my own beliefs or revealing that I did not share them. At the moment, more important than our differences were our connections as people trying to live good and meaningful lives in the different ways we define them and love and care for each other. I turn now to my eulogy for Jerry, a survivor of the Holocaust and my research partner, part of my academic community and part of my family for more than a decade. Many of Jerry's family and friends gathered for his service were highly educated professionals who cared deeply about the Holocaust. So I focused on our research together as well as what a mensch he was and how much I loved him. For example, I tell the story of going to Treblinka with Jerry and finding the gravestone for Bodzentin, the town from which his mother and sister were taken to be gassed at this death camp. I say, being in Poland with Jerry taught me much about remembering, experiencing, and carrying grief. I continue to carry him in my heart and mind as a beacon of hope in these dangerous times and a teacher of how to forgive, learn, communicate, and live life passionately with love and empathy. Knowing that some of Jerry's family are ultra-conservative, I am careful not to say much specifically about religion or politics. Though in each of these cases, I couch my words in ways that might speak to my various audiences, what I said came from my heart and my need to share, honor, grieve, and heal from these tremendous losses. Giving eulogies made me feel I could use my words to shield myself and others from the meaninglessness that threatens when loved ones die. The undertaking reminded me that life ends and that we must figure out how to honor those departed, learn from our relationships with them, breathe in our losses, and carry on. For those moments, writing and delivering these eulogies, my life and my work felt meaningful. Part of that feeling arose from my spiritual connection to a community of other grievers. I was reminded, as I reminded others, that love, compassion, and honoring relationships are important aspects of being human that we as researchers and writers can embrace and include in what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And there will be time to have conversation after the 4 pieces. So thank you for that. My piece is titled The Response, Standing Firm and the Potential Consequences. And when I was writing this, I was reminded of that song, you know, know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to stand. And I think we have to be like that with autoethnography. And so I want to recount one experience of that, of thinking through when we push back to reviewers, when it's not right and when we need to maintain our story, and the way that we write, and dialogue, and being different, not just all writing the same type of story in the same way. So I was asked to write an article responding to something that Carolyn Ellis had written about conversations with her dying sister. And it was intended for a journal unfamiliar with autoethnography, and the editor said that she would review the piece. And that's all fine. I was a little unsure about what it was she actually wanted, but that's not unusual, is it, when we write? I read Carolyn's piece and was amazingly affected by it. And so the first paragraph I wrote as a responder was really just a manifestation of what was going on in my body. And then I wrote other pieces that were spurred from what she wrote. So Carolyn wrote about her sister, I wrote about my sister, she wrote about her mother. I wrote about my mother's funeral when I made cakes, you know, what could I give for my mother as a last tribute for her funeral? And all of her church doing the same, and there being no space for my cakes. And so I sent the piece off, and there were several reviewers, all in track changes, and they all kind of wanted different things from what I had written. Try to focus the piece on one relationship, one reviewer said. It feels like there are too many different people and stories that you're trying to address. Make it more vivid, more evocative. Be careful, one reviewer said. So I wasn't very happy. And so I asked some colleagues about the person that had invited me, and in my spirit, do I want to publish or don't I want to publish? Have I got something to say or haven't I got something to say? I decided that I would not give them the story about my mother as I had written it. I'll keep it for myself or publish it somewhere else. I would keep the very first bit of it, which talked about the manifestation of Carolyn's piece, and I would write something else for them. And the something else is what I'm going to share with you now. I sit reading, drawn in by words, like oil on the head flowing down the body, pooling on the floor. I am engulfed. Tears form, heavy they fall across my cheek, tracing the contours of my face. A smile spreads across my soul, and I nod. My eyes are following the path of words. They dance, and in tandem stir a million memories, moments, a sting, a release, a water slide into the deep. I'm moving from the tempest to the eye, now seeing with another's eye. And here amidst the swirling torrent, reading conversations with my dying sister, there is peace and a sadness I recognize. Here in the mundanity of life and conversation, there is living, fleshed out living, laid bare, simple, humble, human. What might I take? What is taking me? As a priest offers bread and wine, I know I am being funneled in, through and up to become part of the storm and also its peace. But I also recognize my options to be open or closed, to enter or turn away. And I know not to enter every storm. So why this one? It began with a random photo, Ellis 2001 in 2004 for me, Carolyn and her mother. with mother, with child. Black and white, qualitative inquiry. The image stops me, the story sticks. She is cleaning beneath the nails, a recess that can't be seen. A stone under the heel, a seed in the tooth, gnawing, niggling, nagging. But Caroline was there, caring for the tiny spaces, and I respond with my mother, writing our lives. I wrote Going Home, challenging interpretive privilege, a released gift only recognised in death. An invitation arrives, and unsure of what I'm supposed to be doing, I just write. There is usually a niggle, a force, a wave coming at me, and I push back or let go. I'm spiky, prickly. I open my hands. Here, take this. This is how I weave, braiding life. Divided into three, brought together in the fingers, one strand at a time, from the left, then from the right, from the left, from the right, from the left, from the right. The middle moves out, the outer moves in. They all become strong, united. Then it narrows. Until a moment, I get to the point. I tie a knot or a bow, and it ends. Science separates, creates divisions, moves us into camp, undermines our uniqueness, threatens intuition, pours water on hot coals. But with her fingers, Caroline draws the strands together. From the left, from the right, from the left, from the right, from the left, from the right. I've been plaiting my hair for 50 years. Each braid, each morning, I notice is different. I have no process other than from the left, from the right, trusting it will come together. Smoothness and tension, I feel the strength growing. Ecclesiastes 14:12 says, a cord of three is not easily broken. I have two sisters. We are three. As Caroline braids, she takes Cancer in the right hand, her sister in the left. And in her fingers, her strong, agile fingers, nimble fingers with their gold bands and gems, she moves each in turn to the center, to the eye. Delirium from the left, with a rock and a hard place from the right. Aggression from the left, laid over dizzy from the right. The plait grows. In communion, we take the bread and the wine and plait into the spirit. You want me to be careful? I ask a reviewer. You want me to divide my life, to bring division, to focus on one thing, to offer one strand, to disconnect myself, to untangle the plait? Provoked by Caroline, I take my mother in the left and my sister in the right, the funeral in the left, the last offering in the right. What would a mother value after death? Something baked, butter into flour, lightly with the fingers, the strong, agile fingers, golfer's fingers. With mother, with child, she shares her baking. Caroline takes the black sheep in the left and laughter in the right. Take me to Luray in the left, ice cream in the right. I take cake in the left, and in my right hand, all the members of my mother's church doing the same, baking for my mother. How do I plait that? There's too many strands. In conversation, Caroline listens, takes notice. I listen to you, my friend, and take notice. Who will I be without my sister? She asks, overlaying the left with the right, weaving other losses. Will part of me disappear when there is no one to remember? I take my sisters, Karen and Candice. And from the right and from the left, who will I be without us three? When there is no 3, there is no plat. I tie a bow for now. Thank you. Thank you. So we move on now to Pat, speaking the truth in love, a situation and hopefully decolonizing approach to feedback. Over to you, my friend.
I don't like that title any longer. But it's there. When Katrina asked me if I wanted to take part in this session, I was about to go on holiday. So I had a bit of a think, given the topics that we were talking about, and wrote my title hurriedly. But when I came back and started to think about what I was actually going to say, I realised that I really didn't like and was uncomfortable with the hopefully decolonising bit of it. So let's leave that out.
It's gone.
It's gone. And I'll get on with my story. So in 2000, I went to work at the University of Sheffield. And because of my previous experience of professional doctoral programmes, I was asked to work on those that Sheffield ran in the Caribbean. In the UK, professional doctorates, called EdDs, are 4-year programmes where students focus their studies and research on issues relating to their job. In contrast to standard PhD, UK standard PhD programmes, students spend around 50% of their time on taught courses that are assessed by assignments. And it varies from institution to institution, but on our programme, they had to complete 6,000 word assignments in the first 2 years. The other 50% of time is given to completing a research-based thesis of, in our case, around 70,000 words. Everything in England depends on the word numbers and budgets for all of these things. So this EdD programme involved a lot of feedback throughout, and it's this feedback that I'm concerned with here. Sheffield University started working in Trinidad and Tobago in the early 1980s, following an invitation from the members of the Trinidad and Tobago's Unified Teachers Association, who, having heard Sheffield staff presenting at conferences, asked them to go to Trinidad to put on certificated courses dealing with special educational needs. At that time and in that country, there was very little provision for children with a range of additional needs, and many of the kids who had them had no schooling whatsoever. So the courses were very, very popular, and teachers and educational ministry workers wanted more, not just about special educational needs, and they wanted them at increasing levels. So by the time I went there in 2000, there were certificate, diploma, masters, PhD and EdD programmes on offer. These were taught at 2 local study schools a year with online contact on demand by students in between. People from other islands also wanted in. So St. Lucia was the first to ask for it to have programmes, and then Jamaica followed. And amazing, I mean, it really does seem amazing. When I did the calculations, I was gobsmacked. Something in the region of 3,000 Caribbean students graduated from Sheffield over the time the programmes were running. Many working their way from certificate to doctorate. And increasingly, the courses were staffed by Caribbean graduates, with some of them eventually taking up positions in Sheffield and many ending up working in the University of the West Indies and other higher education institutions in the region. When Sheffield first got involved in the Caribbean, there was considerable support, including subsidised fees and full doctoral scholarships to come to Sheffield to study for PhDs. So the support was coming from the then Vice-Chancellor, Sir Gareth Edwards. His commitment was because his dad's job had been driving lorries full of the pitch from the Asphalt Lake in Trinidad that, up until the 1970s, was used for surfacing those roads in the UK. Now, did you know that? Fascinating. Sir Gareth was a working class lad who had gone to grammar school and had got on in the world as a result. And he was a great advocate of the power of education to change lives. He wanted to give back. And he liked the connection with his dad as well, and the fact that his dad's job was so dependent on Trinidad in a sense. Whilst his next two successors followed this policy, the lure of foreign students paying international fees led the guy after them to rescind the subsidy, and the programs ended in 2020, which was very, very sad. The year before I began working in Sheffield, working in the Caribbean, I'd read Linda Tuiwei Smith's 1999 Decolonizing Methodologies, Researching Indigenous Peoples. Now, this book is now in its third edition, and it's pretty special. It had made an enormous impact on me. And standing in front of my first classes, I was very conscious of what I looked like and represented. A white woman from the colonizing country, with all that that implicated relating to inter alia, status, authority, oppression, exploitation. I was very, very conscious of that. I was teaching on the courses that led to the assignments and, and the supervising. So I had a lot of involvement with the students. I'd always favoured a constructivist, Socratic, maybe teaching style. Yeah, there were times when I did lecture, but my preference was for a critical questioning approach, inviting students to join me in interrogating concepts, not taking meanings and understandings for granted as shared and established and immutable. I knew that there were always some, maybe many students who found this challenging because their previous experiences had often been of the teachers taking on the role of experts, filling vessels up with knowledge. In the Caribbean, this was definitely the case because these countries had imposed the traditional hierarchical, selective and competitive system characteristic of English schools from Victorian times onwards. And little had changed, although it had to some degree in some places in the UK. It was a bit like stepping back in time from the point of view of pedagogies when I got there. It's significant that almost without exception, the doctoral students, the Ed.D. students we worked with had been very successful in school. They'd passed exams, gone to elite schools and then colleges and universities. Many were head teachers, many had senior positions in schools, many were Ministry of Education officials. Indeed, over the years, half a dozen chief education officers for their islands came on the programme. And I found that really, really scary, teaching these people who are in charge of the whole education system in their countries. I began to understand that they had ideas about what proper teaching and research looked like, and hence expectations of me. They also had expectations based on their previous educational success. They expected to do well in their assignments because the traditional regurgitative style had always worked very well for them. However, at doctoral level, a different approach involving personal reflection, criticality, wide reading and use of recent and relevant literatures, justification for what had been written. My mantra is you can do what you like, provided you can justify it, rather than using obfuscatory academic expression was required. Even though this approach had been made absolutely clear to my mind in the assignment briefs, my critical feedback often came as a shock and was not always well received. And many a time I was told that I was very wrong. A little bit like Katrina's experience with the review coming back. I thought, to my mind, couch what I said in positive terms, praising what was good, but being very clear about the work, why the work wasn't meeting the required standards, and explaining clearly what they needed to do to improve. Now, I was obviously concerned and unhappy about how I had received and responded to the work. So I spoke with Jennifer, who was the director of the Caribbean program, about what was going on. Jennifer was Trinidadian and had been involved right at the beginning in bringing the university to the island. She had been a Sheffield student right from the start, progressing through the certificate, diploma and master's courses, and then had come to England and done a PhD. She'd initially overseen the Trinidad element of the programme before she took on the overall directorship. So Jennifer had the lived experience and the insights to advise me. She was also an extremely skillful teacher, and I learned so much from her. We became very close friends, and she said we were sisters. Same mother, different father, she once told a big news taxi driver in Jamaica. We were driving somewhere, and she said, "Oh, we're sisters," and it was him who said, "Same mother, different fathers." Her untimely death in 2019 really robbed me of a bestie. So we talked about the difficulties many of the students had with critically using literature and referencing. And Jennifer remarked on how ironic this was, because most of the students peppered much of what they had to say in general, including in the classroom, with biblical and other holy book references, which they could cite chapter and verse. Religion and faith play an important part in many people's lives in the Caribbean. In Trinidad, for example, Christians from various denominations, Hindus, Muslims, and members of Afro-Caribbean syncretic groups would all be together in classrooms, and in that setting displayed tolerance for each other's beliefs. We had been asked that we start and end each teaching day with prayers, and people from the different faith groups and none, not that there were very many of them, took turns to lead these prayers and celebrations. It was fine by me, and it was a nice thing at the end of the day. It was a bit like prayer for the day or thought for the day on Radio 4 that we get in England, and you never knew what was going to come, and it could be really very, very different. So reflecting on the way in which students did draw on their sacred texts in this way, it came to us that pointing out that they knew full well how to reference and suggesting that they could extrapolate from this to their academic work might help. We explained that our feedback could be seen as us speaking the truth in love, which references St. Paul in his epistle to the Ephesians, and that rather than taking this approach as St. Paul advocated to help people become more Christ-like, our aim was to help them improve their academic work. And it worked for many people. And it worked for me too, enabling me to feel that it was more of a respectful response and was building on where they were coming from. So from then on, this notion of speaking the truth in love was guided all the times when I've given feedback on assignments, theses, articles submitted for peer review, and I'm glad to have found it. That's the first one I've ever read, and it was
It's called Keeping to Time in Love. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Finally, Elise Pineau, are you ready to talk about an articulate witness, the art and ethics of critical response? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Did forget.
Oh, good. I've always taken witnessing to be central to my teaching vocation, and I have come to believe that serving as an articulate witness to the developing work of others in gatherings such as this has become my most heuristic means of social action. And so today I want to reflect on how this witnessing practice developed, what it demands of me as an engaged and informed SPECT actor, to use Augusto Boal's term, and why I believe that witnessing and bearing witness shape the conjoined ethical imperatives and aesthetic craft of my work as a public intellectual. I spent 35 years in performance studies and public speaking classrooms, where one is customarily called to respond immediately and publicly, often to the most vulnerable of presenters, in ways that seek to guide the critical faculties of the audience as much as those of the speaker. And while I have witnessed thousands of students, perhaps the most sublime of which is Bryant Keith Alexander, who opened our day today with his luminous letters to his mother, I think the most instructive wonders of my pedagogical world were the first timers. Those novice writer-performers, wings still wet from their first unfolding, yet leaping, still leaping fiercely out across the endless horizon of narrative space, as if there were no safety net to catch them should they turn and tumble into the sea. And it was decades of that classroom practice with those new to the vulnerability of personal narrative or public performance that convinced me that there must always be a safety net to safeguard their falling, their flying through the outer risky reaches of autoethnographic space. And then, as now, I take my task to be that net. Many of you will know this moment. If you have ever served as a facilitator or a respondent, you will have the moment in your own embodied memory when someone begins to speak, and in those first seconds you can hear it. How deep they intend to dig, how high they need to fly, and how desperately they need to soar on the updraft of your undivided attention. And so you hunker down there in that charged room or page or screen, eyes trained on that vulnerable body working. And you call up all the powers of your concentration so that you can hold that space with fixed attention, saying through the intense directedness of your body, I will hold this space for you and I will not let you fall. This, I believe, is the first role and responsibility of the witness, humanistically speaking. And from this location of committed full-bodied attention, you witness that person dance their feet bloody on the razor's edge of some existential life wound. And when the metaphorical lights rose on that person, often spent and shocked as they can be by that sharp shift back to the now, back to a room of relative strangers with eyes wide, waiting for their cue, waiting for you to cue them how to move from spectacle into speaking. And if you have ever served as facilitator or respondent, and especially if you have spent time in arts-based classrooms where it is customary to speak into the immediacy of that post-performance silence, then you will have learned how to bear the responsibility of witnessing. Because you will know that while performance is magical, the critical shift from witnessing to bearing witness is no magic act. That moment of shifting from watching to witnessing is no rabbit from the hat spectacle. And if you have ever served as witness to the vulnerable, then you know that your job is precisely to track those bloody footprints back to a source, back through the collected resources of informed, theoretical, and political discourses, through which presenter and audience make sense, make meaning, make sustainable matter out of the ephemeral traces of narrative. This is what I characterize as the social action of articulate witnessing, because this is the moment that matters. When you are called to help bear the weight of a body flying, a body falling back into the real, which is sometimes too much for that speaker or that audience to bear on their own. And so you humbly share that burden with them, speaking into the stillness, into the still, bloodied space of their dance on the razor of vulnerable knowing. Many of you know this. As educators and supervisors trained deep and daily in the high-stakes discourse of critical response, you know that such tracking toward talk is no small feat, No off the cuff and on the fly jibber jabber that just anybody can accomplish, because bearing witness to performed autoethnography does not happen in a vacuum. When you roll up your epistemic sleeves, the appearance of immediate, spontaneous response is itself a performative sleight of hand that hides its own labor, eliding in the heat of the moment the pyramid of theoretical assertions and epistemological arguments and citational genealogies which have trained you, sometimes over decades, how to listen, how to laud that person's achievement, and most importantly, how to land their argument back in the thick of interdisciplinary talk. Because in those moments, the rabbit in our pedagogical hats must be weighty with words. So in the face of that weighty challenge, the articulate witnessing charges you to gather your own courage, to make your own leap into vulnerable speech, to trust the updraft of your attention, your intellect, and your empathy to do what is needed in the service of others. Sometimes that task is simply to soothe the ravaged soul back into that presenting body, to call it gently back from the edges of its dissolution. Sometimes your job is to recognize and help reconfigure a blockage that stifled an utterance or glossed an insight, helping to loosen the tongue for the next iteration. Sometimes you are challenged to pierce sharply and incisively the blinders that prohibit critical reflection with an eye toward helping them see better, see through. But always your job as articulate witness is to make connections that count, so that what we bear forward bears witness to theories enfleshed in the act of a body that is working their stage to the best of their ability in that developmental moment. Because this is the heart of articulate witnessing. It's the reason I believe that we gather here in conferences to witness and to bear witness to each other about why autoethnography matters and what it demands of us as spect actors in a world desperately in need of an updraft of attentive, transformative energy and critical, compassionate response.
Whoa, thank you, Elise. Wonderful. We have 10 minutes or so for conversation. So I would like to open the floor, the stage. Now you've learned how to respond. Teacher isn't watching. If anybody would like to share a reflection, share a thought, share an embodied, meaningful moment to you, it doesn't have to be a question. Just give up what your body is holding, either online or in the room.
I will just say that these were amazing presentations, and I'm so delighted to be on this panel with all of you wonderful women. And Katrina, yours just really, really touched me so deeply, and it was so beautifully written and expressed. So thank you so much.
That's saying what comes around goes around. You share something and that's a response back. This is what the work should do. We tell a story and we get a story back. But thank you. Joshua, you wanted to... Oh, Alec. I'll go to Joshua first because you seem to ask all the questions first of all.
I don't know if that was on purpose or not. I was just gonna say how cute Pat's cat is.
It's been a bit of a pain during this presentation, I'll tell you.
Right. I liked it, that bit where it went up onto your chest. Thank you. Alec, did you have your hand up then? Yes, you did, appearing on our screen.
Yeah, deep respect, fantastic presentations, all of you. Very humbling and moving and brilliant. Love them. That's all I wanted to say. And yeah,
It's okay, you don't have to say anymore.
just one more thing. Spectacular. I'll never forget that word. Brilliant. Great. Thanks, Elise.
Thank you. But that is Augusto Boal, the Brazilian educator. So I'm pulling from him.
All right.
And just
Okay.
appropriating it, but it seems to fit.
Well, I'll plagiarize both of you then. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I mean, for me, Elise, for all of us, I imagine, when you said, I will hold this space for you and I will not let you fall, that I find is at the root of autoethnography for each other. We have to hold the space for each other and to not let people fall. That is just wonderful. And I will take that with me into how we think about running a conference and how we, you know, in my mind, when you said that, I imagined the circus and the acrobat and them trying to catch the other person's hands as they spin from one platform to another, and there's that safety net underneath. And we have to be that for each other.
I wanted to comment in addition to the murmurations that Pat's cat was doing, which were beautiful. Carolyn had the look of pure delight on her face the entire time. And I wanted to acknowledge that because I felt that's what I was feeling through all of this. I love the braiding, Katrina. And Elise, I'm very envious of Bryant having been your student because I want to have been your student, and I didn't get to be your student except through these kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, here.
I wasn't going to say anything, but what you've just said has brought back a memory for me that during the pandemic, I was caring for my mum, who passed away a few months ago, and the washing line in the garden, you know, one of those cobwebby ones? The old line had been on that since I was a little girl, and nobody'd ever mended it. And I just thought, this is the time. So I'd got a new one and I'd put it on, but I didn't want to throw away the old line, and I didn't know why. And because I'm making a PhD about reparation via bricolage, so creating new out of old, one day I came across some balls of wool, and I had this idea of braiding, and I thank you, Katrina, for reminding me of this process. I got some old wool and I got the old washing line, and I braided the wool into the washing line as a meditative practice whilst I was caring for my mum. And I thought, I've always had this fascination for threes. And again, Katrina, some things that verse, again, resonated. And I decided I would make a garment. And off the garment, I would hook somehow these tentacles. So it's going to kind of look like a creature. And I wanted to wear this cloak or something as an honoring for, I don't know, to wear a bit of the history of my relationship with my mother, because when she had her stroke in 2019, it was a gift for me, not so much for her, but actually maybe for her too, because it was a moment of reparation for our relationship as daughter and mother. And from the moment she became ill, I had to become a woman. I was in my mid-50s, and I was still a child in her eyes and in my own eyes in relation to her. But I had to become her carer, and therefore I had to become somebody who loved her. So I would sit in the outside toilet in the garden and shout at myself, it's time to grow up. So this act of braiding wool to her falling apart washing line to give it new life was something really powerful. But until this moment, I'd forgotten that in my house at home, I have a pile of this stuff and I'm going to get it out when I get home. I'm going to finish the garment. So thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for just beautiful presentations. And one of the things that I'm always struck by when we come together is of just seeing lives that in a sense just inspire and you want to emulate, and pathways open of where others have trod and are treading. And so, you know, just the knowledge and the wisdom that I've heard from you as the presenters, but also other people here as well. I'm struck by that every year, and it's just incredibly inspiring as to, you know, how we can learn and what we can become. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Elise.
It's such an incredible honor to sit on this panel with these three women and listen to you and feel the resonance as each of you are speaking so much into the tricky, difficult spaces of response. I was focusing on the compassionate, but Katrina, to speak back to reviewers and hold your own in doing that. You know, Pat, the kind of reflexivity of trying to both be honest, but negotiate this very, very tricky path. And Carolyn, I eulogized all three of my family members who have passed in tricky spaces of love and discourse and audience's needs. And it brought back what a masterful stroke that is. So all three of you, I've learned so much from. So glad that you put this panel together on an idea that I had there. So
Brilliant. Thank you for the idea, Liz.
Go, Elise.
Yeah, thank you all. It's a wonderful panel to move towards the end of the conference, and it's just been fantastic. There's one thing I wanted to pick up again on. One of my favorite songwriters, his band's been criticized for not being very edgy or very rocky, a bit soft, and he said there's nothing tougher or wilder than a good tune. And I love that what you picked up on from Elise, what she said, I will hold this space for you and I will not let you fall. I've written that down as well, but I've also picked up, Katrina, what you're saying about being prickly. Mm-hmm. And Elise, you saying that part of the job is to challenge to pierce, sometimes sharply, the blinders to critical reflection. And that, I see us doing that here today, this work as well, is sharing this kind of work. It's just, I love that prickliness, I love that sharpness, I love being able to, those things to coexist. And so that's really stayed with me. Thank you for that.
Thank you, David. Yep. Gail Leatherby.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you so much, all of you. That was so wonderful, all of it. Quite a few years ago, when I was an undergraduate, I remember coming across my first feminist research book in the library and reading about how important it was as researchers to make ourselves vulnerable. And Elise talked about vulnerable speech, and just kind of connecting to things that everybody's said, how wonderful that this is a space where vulnerable speech is really respected. And you know, I've been to several presentations where people have talked about their work not being understood outside of this forum, and how wonderful that there are so many great people creating this wonderful, vulnerable space.